Chris Dimakos is our CJAD 800 legal contributor. We talk usually every Wednesday afternoon. Today is no exception, and he is on the line. Chris, you sent a story today. I'd never heard of this before. Didn't fully even understand this. So I'm going to use the two words you have, which are recruitment, which we all know, versus inducement. And with respect to a particular case, what the difference is and how it played out. So first of all, what is the difference between the two?
Right. So recruitment, from a legal perspective, the difference is if you are recruited and you jump ship from your current employer to a new prospective employer, and then your job ends up coming to an end at the new employer, you have no claim against your employer to say, well, I was at a job before this for 15 years, and you just let me go after 6 months. I'd like to get a 15-year severance package. You don't get that option if you were recruited. But if you were induced to come work for a new prospective employer, there's a legal definition that goes along with that, which I'll explain in just a bit. But in those cases, if you join a new employer and the court finds that you were induced to join that new employer, well then, even if you work for 6 months, the court might provide you, and they end your employment, they might give you a severance that is more closer to something you would have had you stayed at the previous company, which could be 14 or 15 months, like we saw in the case that I sent you by email.
Okay, but I'm trying to understand, for example, people are forever, perhaps you're at a job, you're looking for something else. Can you run through the details of this? Because again,
right.
I'd never really heard of something like this.
So
okay.
here's we'll break it down. Watch this. So you're on the radio right now, and you've been there for years, and a competing radio station decides from the U.S. that they're going to try to break into the Montreal market. So they have somebody say, instead of paying, grassroots and doing this, we're going to actively try and get Aaron Rand to join us. So what they do is they have a recruiter, and they contact you. You didn't file any CV. You didn't apply for any job.
Oh, okay.
Sitting there,
right.
And they actively tell you, instead of making you an offer, they say, tell us what you're getting paid, and we're going to beat it. Instead of saying, well, this is what we offer. No. You tell us what you need. And what if you say, well, I don't want to get into legal trouble here. Don't worry about it. We're going to not only give you lawyers, but we're going to pay for any judgment that comes against. So it's an active attempt to take you from one company and join theirs. And what the court does is look at how involved was the employee. Was the employee actively looking? Did they participate? Did they, make it? Or was it like they were sitting, minding their own business, going to work, happy at work, but the competitor was just so active in trying to recruit that they almost induced them to come over. And the court looks at that. And if that's the case, and in this case here where I cited, a woman was a VP of marketing. She ended up changing jobs. She was with the company for 15 years. She ended up joining a new competitor, and they actively induced her to come on board, and they let her go after 6 months.
Oh.
And when she filed for a grievance, when she went to court to say, hey, this is an unjust dismissal, the company was saying, well, we're going to give you only a few weeks because you've only been with us for 6 months. And her legal team said, well, 1 second here. You induced her to come over. She was at a company for 15 years, and you basically, you did everything you could to have her come over. You should be on the hook for those 15 months of severance, as she would have had she stayed where she was.
Right.
And the court said in these exceptional circumstances, that can be the case. And the lesson here is, it doesn't mean if you change jobs, you're automatically entitled to severance based on your previous employment. But if you're not actively seeking a new job and a competitor, and it happens often, and I can tell you from experience now more than ever that employers are looking for the right people, not just a person, but the right person, and they're willing to pay, and they're very targeted in their approach in recruitment. They have to be careful that they don't cross over that line. There is a line, there's a legal line in the sand that says if you go too far in your recruitment, if you make it, almost not a choice of the employee, but you make it such a nice package and you do everything in your power to make sure that they jump ship, you might run the risk of being liable for a severance that would include all of their years of service at the previous employer.
So my first question, go all the way back to when you laid out the example, this particular case, and I thought they don't ask you, they want to know how much you're making. I mean, it would have seemed to me the first thing to say is, that's really none of your business. How much are you offering? But that wouldn't change this at all.
Right. Well, yes and no. It could, but they look at all the different factors. You know, for example, they take a look at when you talked about salary. Was it something that the competitor came up with and just forwarded to you, and then you decided, well, it is more, so maybe I'll go? Mm-hmm. Or did they come up to you and say, look, we want you to come on board, that we're not taking no for an answer. Tell us what you're making. We'll give you more. And there was no pre-established offer. The offer was, we'll pay you more than whatever you're making.
Okay.
There's two different scenarios there, and the court recognized that.
So I would also bring up the fact that what you're describing here is not a hypothetical case. This is an actual case as it played out, right?
It happened. The judgment was rendered just a few weeks ago. And, the message that goes up, not just to companies and HR, but also professional recruiters that are mandated, they sometimes are told by the companies that hire them, go and get this person. And that can be sticky, because when you go and get a particular person and they only want that person, and they tell you, do whatever it takes to get that person, the recruiter should know that, well, we're running the risk here of, unless we factor that into the contract and say, we're going to honor you, we're going to honor your years of service, which happens a lot. Unless they knowingly do that, they can run themselves into some trouble. So it's happening more and more. We're seeing that more and more with companies that don't want to waste time, training and trying to find the right people out of school, which takes time. They're starting to say, just get me the right person. I'll pay more. But whatever I pay more to this person will probably end up saving money, because it costs more to train somebody from scratch. But
it also, I was going to say, it also sounds to me like if you had been this person, right, and eventually they're after you, and you want to take it, it turns out to be more money. You would have been, it would seem, I mean, hindsight's 20/20, it would have been much better off to stipulate in that employment contract that in the event that job does not work out beyond a certain period, they would have to pay you that severance.
Right. And so you have an honorary law degree, because that's exactly, if she I'm not sure if she had a lawyer at the time when this took place, but what they should have done was say, let's not leave this up to chance. They're recruiting you, actively recruiting you. They're new in town. You have a lot of job security here with your current job. You've been here for 15 years. If they let you go without just cause, you can run up to, and maybe sometimes even more than a year of notice. I'm not sure you want to leave that on the table. So you can factor that into your employment contract, absolutely. And you know what? One thing I've noticed about that is, even if you ask the question, even if the competitor doesn't want to do that, just by asking the question and seeing their reaction might give you an indicator as to how serious they are about keeping you long term.
That's a great point.
If you say, no, it's not what we want to do here, well, that should be a flag to say, maybe the commitment's not as good as it looks like on paper.
Yeah, there's your red flag. By the way, I will tell you, it's interesting you bring this up. First of all, if you're in this situation, you should have called Chris Dimakos. She wouldn't have been here in the first place. But I will tell you, in the radio business, and I know this from, years of experience here, there have been cases where a competing station will call you, right? Offer you whatever, more money or better condition, whatever it happens to be. And I think with the plan that in 6 months, because ideally what they want to do here, and they don't say this when they hire you, is they want to hurt the competitor. So they hire you, they give you more money, but their plan all along has been to eventually just let you go because they've done what they set out to do, which was hurt the competitor.
You're absolutely right. And you know what, Aaron, if you are come across as somebody who understands that dynamic and that possibility, and you start asking the right questions, usually, more often than not, if that's the intention from the competitor, it usually doesn't end up working out between both parties. But if you are able to understand what the dynamics are, what the laws are, and you can strategize and make the best offer possible, not only can you maybe get more salary, but you might be able to carry over your security when you do that. So it's important to understand how these things work.
Another lesson learned. Chris Dimakos, our CJAD legal contributor. Thank you, Chris.
Introducing Bryan Adams Radio on iHeartRadio. Hosted by Bryan Adams himself.
Join me for an insider look on a wild ride through 40 years of global rock and roll.
Bryan Adams Radio. Now available on the free iHeartRadio app. Or ask your smart speaker to play Bryan Adams Radio on iHeartRadio.
Who's ready to rock?
kids wanna rock.